All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Today we're unpacking the carceral narrative loop. This is an absolutely brilliant framework developed by Keith P. Talley, and let me tell you, it completely flips the script on how we look at success and failure in reentry. It's a real game changer, so let's just dive right in.
So right off the bat, we need to shatter a pretty massive illusion. You know how you'll see two people with virtually identical support structures, but they have drastically different outcomes? One thrives, the other just kind of stalls out. Well, the system almost always slaps a label on that survival hesitation, calling it a lack of motivation. We look at someone struggling and think, oh, they just aren't trying hard enough. But when we look deeper at the reality, that hesitation isn't a lack of drive at all. It's actually a highly calculated reaction to a deeply hostile force.
Think of it like a giant iceberg. If we're only looking at the visible messaging up top, above the waterline, all the basic instructions people are given, we are entirely blind to the heavy machinery working underneath. The visible messaging, that's really just a megaphone. The massive hidden structure beneath the surface, the actual narrative, is the deep current that truly dictates the outcome. And when service providers ignore or misunderstand this hidden foundation, they end up blaming the individual's character instead of seeing the devastating systemic force that's literally pulling them under.
Let's put this into perspective. Imagine you're driving on a totally unpredictable road, just absolutely covered in unmarked speed bumps and hidden potholes. What are you going to do? You slow down, right? You hesitate. Now, service providers might see someone crawling along and think they're just lazy or lacking effort. But in reality, that's a brilliant, calculated survival response. They aren't unmotivated to drive, they're just trying desperately not to crash their car on a road that was practically engineered against them.
So that begs the question, what exactly is out there building all these invisible potholes? Well, Talley maps this out as the Carceral Narrative Systems Loop. It's essentially a 6-step closed circuit. It starts with a foundational belief, translates into physical roadblocks, breaks a person down psychologically, and then, here's the kicker, eventually uses the individual's own survival behavior to keep the whole machine running. Let's trace how these 6 nodes actually connect.
Okay, it all kicks off at node 1, which is the ideology of disposability. This is the invisible engine of the whole thing. It's this quiet, underlying systemic assumption that certain lives are simply surplus or inherently dangerous. Now, you won't always hear this spoken out loud, but make no mistake, it is the fuel. Without this foundational belief, the rest of the carceral machine would have absolutely no power to run.
Because the system holds onto that ideology, it naturally builds into codified harm at node 2, institutions and policies. This is where we engineer physical roadblocks that practically guarantee failure. We're talking about things like severe housing exclusions, sweeping occupational licensing bans, invisible surveillance through restrictive probation, and disenfranchisement. These are not accidents, folks. They are the literal mechanics of the machine, throwing up stop signs everywhere a person turns.
And naturally, those policies create Node 3, which is essentially a giant pressure cooker of material conditions. The system builds this brutal trap of resource starvation, which forces a constant, exhausting hustle just to survive on a daily basis. Combine that with severe housing lockouts, relentless surveillance fatigue, and total healthcare neglect, the system basically drops individuals into this crushing environment, takes a step back, and waits to see if they crack under the pressure. It's an environment quite literally designed to be unlivable.
Now, to cover up this hostile environment, Node 4 pulls off the system's greatest psychological trick, the big lie. It manufactures myths to shift all the blame squarely onto the individual, labeling them as a permanent threat or societal burden. But the systemic reality? It's completely different. Evolution is human nature, and these individuals have immense potential. Risk is just a label assigned by the system. It's not some innate human trait. The machine just needs this myth to hide the trap it built back in Node 3.
These manufactured myths then crystallize into a very real tangible barrier, social stigma. This is a deep mark of shame that causes society to view these individuals as permanently less worthy. And listen, this isn't just about hurt feelings. Stigma fundamentally changes what a person is actually allowed to access in life. It dictates where they can live, where they can work, and whether they are met with a second chance or just another firmly closed door. It's basically the external enforcement of that big lie. Having those doors slammed in your face over and over eventually leads to a tragic shift at Node 5, internalized stigma. This is where the individual stops questioning the machine and starts questioning their own worth. The system's myths become their own identity. They adopt this incredibly heavy imposter syndrome, constantly terrified someone is going to figure them out. They get completely caught in the past self-bind, believing, well, I guess I am a liability.
I'll never be anything more than my record.
You can actually picture it like being trapped in a glass jar, a jar built entirely out of systemic labels: high risk, burden, non-compliant, threat. The system projects these labels so relentlessly that the person eventually just cowers inside of them, completely boxed in by a narrative that they didn't even write. They internalize it and start thinking, I'm the problem here. Why even bother trying?
Trapped inside that glass box, we hit node 6, behavior. And this is crucial. The individual executes a completely logical survival reflex. They shrink, they withdraw to dodge the system's heat and avoid any further rejection. But remember that misdiagnosis we talked about at the very beginning? Providers don't see the glass box. They just see the withdrawal. So they log it as data, taking it as concrete proof of instability, non-compliance, or just a total lack of motivation.
And that brings us to what is easily the most chilling part of this entire machine, the closed loop. The victim's own survival response, their shrinking, their silence, their withdrawal, is actually used by the system to validate that original ideology of disposability way back at node 1. The silence justifies the harsh policies. The withdrawal confirms the stigma. The machine literally harvests the victim's own survival instincts as fuel to keep itself running, basically saying, see, we were right about them all along.
Which brings us to the ultimate million-dollar question for anyone working in reentry, policy, or advocacy. If you are dealing with a machine that is this perfectly designed, a loop that literally weaponizes human survival instincts to sustain itself, how on earth do you dismantle it? I mean, where do you even begin to strike a system that feeds on the exact reactions it provokes?
Well, the answer actually lies right back at node 6, our critical point of intervention. You see, the difference in outcomes isn't about forcing more effort. It's about reclaiming narrative agency. We have to provide a powerful, undeniable counter-narrative right at that point of behavior. If we can prove to the individual that their environment is actually safe, that they aren't being judged through the lens of a label, their survival reflex changes. They don't shrink. They stop withdrawing. And when that happens, the entire machine is starved of its fuel, and the loop finally fractures.
So I want to leave you with this final provocative thought to carry forward into your own work. We don't need to teach them how to drive. We need to mark the road and prove it's safe to hit the gas. Think about that. Are your programs currently spending all their energy trying to teach people how to drive, treating them as if they're broken and unmotivated? Or are you actively doing the deep, systemic work to mark the road, clear out those invisible potholes, and prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that it is finally safe for them to accelerate? Because that is how you break the loop.